Here we're looking at a graph, or two graphs, of world energy consumption in quadrillion BTU. On the left side, we see OECD member status. That is looking at countries in terms of whether they're a member of the OECD or not. And you can shorten this down to say, well, looking at energy consumption in terms of whether countries are developed or developing or somewhere in between. Notice that OECD countries from the 1990s through projections through the 2040s have a relatively modest growth in their energy consumption. It's not plateaued, but it's certainly not very steep. If you contrast this with the non-OECD countries, we see a much steeper projected growth, especially as the 21st century matures. This is where the energy consumption is expected to be the most intense. These countries, especially led by China and India, are going to be consuming ever greater quantities of energy than they ever have before. And this means that the OECD countries and the non-OECD countries are going to be competing, essentially, for the same energy resources, whether they're non-renewables or renewables. This graph brings into question then issues about energy security and whether or not there's going to be enough distribution networks and enough resources to keep prices relatively affordable for most of the world's people. If things get difficult to move around, or if prices get too high, then economies will suffer. And if economies suffer, then politics can suffer. And we don't want to go down that road. So planning ahead is, planning to succeed. So when we're looking at this, energy analysts say, well, we've got to prepare for a time when the non-OECD countries are going to be consuming a very large portion of the Earth's energy resources. On the right-hand side, we've got energy consumption, or world energy consumption, by fuel type. And notice here we've got liquids, coal, natural gas, the renewables, and nuclear power. So we've got a combination here of non-renewables as well as renewables. The liquids are going to be following the same path in terms of projected consumption that coal, natural gas, and renewables do. And notice there's no slacking off here. They're all rising with relative to 2010 levels. Coal takes a projected dip here by 2040, but not much. If you take the general trend of everything, we're using more of everything, and there's no kind of letting up on this. This means that, again, we've got to prepare for a time when there's going to be more people and more countries struggling and competing for and buying sometimes limited energy resources.